Okay, so the reasoning, as we started to talk about last time, is a direct reinforcement or a direct tool of what's the last proof that we want to speak about?
Logos.
Logos, which means logic, exactly. So logic is essentially how we walk people through our arguments, utilizing typically language or making arguments, making claims, and how we get people to draw to a conclusion. And that's all that reasoning is. Essentially, it's drawing to the conclusion on the basis of evidence. So we have a myriad of uses of evidence, as we've laid out over there, right? Like examples and testimonies and images and audio and visual and dance and hand gestures and movements and clothing and positioning, and all those different elements can communicate so much to us about what we are supposed to feel, what we are supposed to do, what we are supposed to think, what we are supposed to like. All this evidence needs to be made sense of, though. For you all, when you make arguments to an audience, or when you make arguments even to a friend, you typically have a lot of evidence that you are going to use to try to get your point across, or to try to get them to believe you, or go along with whatever action that you want them to do. So what you do is you start to organize it and create a way that's going to make sense to them that, yes, in fact, you should do this, right? And so this evidence and how we present it is key in getting the audience to draw to the conclusion that we want them to come to. So what conclusion do we want them to come to? Well, for each of your artifacts, you know what they want to persuade you to do, and that's why we've been identifying this element of ethos as well as pathos, because those are resources to get you to do something as well, or to believe or to think something. But when we look at reasoning, this is usually where we will look at the wording or the language that is used. Is the wording or the language always going to be the reasoning in your artifact? No, because you may have one simple statement, and the statement then and the image are going to be the two claims that are going to draw you to a conclusion. Does that make sense to y'all? So it may not be always language. It could be an image and a saying, or it could be a statistic and an image. And by combining those two together, we get our evidence, and you're able to draw to a conclusion to come up with what you hopefully understand the speaker to be persuading you to do. Does that make sense to y'all? Let's put down the terms, and then we'll put these into practice, so that you can see how some of them work. We talked last time about the first reasoning, which was the induction, right? And inductive reasoning, we said it moves from a particular set of, or moves from particular facts to a generalized conclusion, something that we can, in general, come to agree upon, or that we've seen so much evidence that generally, when we come across it, it's going to be true. What did we say before? What was the example? Do you remember? When we're talking about the ease of a class. You're going to your counselor. Right? The ease of the class, remember? Right? So my friend said they're easy. My professor said they were easy. My counselor said they were easy. Thus we conclude that generally they're probably going to be easy. And I say generally and probably almost synonymously. That probably, there's a probability of it being true. Because we've all agreed last time that even if we get all that knowledge from other people, our friends, my professor, our counselor, and we take that class, is there still a chance that that person is not going to be easy? Yeah. Yes, and we know that. So that's what the inductive reasoning is. It's specific facts that we've seen repeated over time, or we've given enough evidence that we can generally assume, if you will, that it is going to be true. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, in your artifacts, if you're seeing a listing of statistic, statistic, and that's why you should believe in this, right? Or like we said before, you're going out and you're going to buy a new car. You go out and you research, and you research, and you research, and you research. And once you get a consistent marking or consistent feedback that this is a good car, this is a good car, this is a good car, that it has all the things that you need over and over again, you're like, all right, I think I can make my decision now. I think I can come to a conclusion. It's what we do all the time. We reason in our own heads as to what makes sense to us to draw to this persuasive decision. And only we know sometimes the qualification qualities that we're looking for. So the second thing that we looked at was the deduction. And this is where we left off before. So the deduction, or deductive reasoning, is reasoning that moves from a general principle, so generally something that everybody can or has already agreed with, or this principle that exists in society, or perchance if we start off with a law, a general principle that exists within any type of culture, and it moves us to a specific conclusion. So perchance a larger idea that becomes incredibly specific or maybe unique to an individual, a person, a group of people, or the like. When we move to this specific conclusion, something like the Los Angeles Lakers to, great, we could do Kobe Bryant, or the starting lineup for the 2015-16 Laker team. Does that make sense? Just at least a little bit more in what we mean by specific and in general. We went over the example before in class, if you don't remember, that we said something like, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Have any of you taken Philosophy 7 in this class? No?
Took Philosophy 2.
How'd that go?
Well.
So if A equals B, and B equals C. Okay, great. So then A equals C. If you know the equation, that's how this plays out. Don't worry about mathematics or equations or Philosophy 7, which is logic. Oh, that makes sense. But we can look at our deduction in turn for if it's going to reveal some type of truth to us. If the first premise is true, then we have to accept all other parts of the premise. So all men are mortal. Is this a true statement? Yes. Socrates is a man, right? He falls in that category. Therefore, he has to be what? Mortal, right? What's the pickle with the deduction? Or what's the problem with the deduction? Or what do you see the issue with being? Where this suggests probable, because we know that even though the evidence is all there, could it still possibly happen that we get a teacher who isn't easy? Yes. The deduction suggests what?
Deduction suggests that there's a less chance of error because you're crossing out, things that might not be true.
Okay.
You're getting more accurate, more precise.
We are. And that's where we come up with this idea of general. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the key word. How many times in our society these days can you use the word all?
Very low.
All students are lazy.
To a certain extent.
Everardo is a student, therefore Everardo is
Lazy.
If I go into every semester with this kind of deductive reasoning or logic in my head, how is that going to happen? What's that going to do for me?
Stress.
What's it going to do for you?
Stress.
Sure, you'll probably be stressed.
Probably make me more lazy.
Oh, yeah, or that, or I don't have very high expectations for you, or I'm always like, ugh, shocked, etc. So, like, how does this go in if I assume or essentialize that all persons, right? So any of you who have ever been stereotyped before know the flaw of a deduction, in fact. Anybody ever have a stereotype against them because of something about them? Yeah. Good. Okay, good. Yeah, me too, right? So you want to give me one? Show me the flaw?
That I was very slow, or how would I say this? Well, slow in terms of, because I'm big, I can't really run. I'll just say I showed that sucker.
All big people are slow moving physically. So what would be the second point? Not you, but throw somebody else in there. Who's a big, moving, fast person?
Warren Sapp.
Warren Sapp is a big person. Therefore, Warren Sapp is a slow-moving individual. Does that work? No. Okay, good. Warren Sapp. Nice, thanks. Anybody else have an essentialized idea? If you fall into any marginalized culture, I'm sure you've had some type of essentialized idea before. Yes.
Because I'm Latino, the men don't know how to cook for
Okay.
themselves.
No, all Latino men are not good cooks.
Because the women take care of them.
Okay, so then we can put that in and we see that there's maybe a flaw in that kind of reasoning, right? So the issue here is to avoid this kind of word when it doesn't apply. Plato and the Greeks, they were the original ones to start up this whole deduction or the syllogism. And back for them, remember, there was this idea of absolute truth, right? Was there that relative truth until the sophists came on the scenes, really? No, absolutely not. So this kind of reasoning worked very well. All persons in the state must blah blah. You're that person, that means you must blah blah, right? So it worked in that way. So the syllogism, if you will, is exactly what we're talking about with deductive reasoning. These two are essentially the same thing. It's the three-part deduction. 1, 2, 3. Where we have a premise, and a conclusion. Aristotle came on the scene and suggested that instead we utilize something called the enthymeme. Now an enthymeme is simply a syllogism where one part is missing. And that one part is missing because it allows for the audience to draw to their own conclusion. Because it is suggested that if we get you to draw to a conclusion on your own without spoon feeding you what you should do or what you have to do, then you'll be more likely to buy into it, more likely to believe it. Does that make sense to y'all? All right, great. So we use only two parts of the syllogism. And so I gave you that example before from last time where I said one of my communication studies students said, I thought communication studies was supposed to be easy. That's why football players major in it. The unstated premise is what? Okay, football players are dumb. Football players aren't smart, right? So did everybody come to that conclusion? We decided yes last time. Absolutely. It's this unstated idea. Almost all of your bumper stickers these days are written in an enthymeme. Allows you to know they're not just coming out and spoon feeding you, but if you ever look at a bumper sticker, you'll be like, oh, that's an enthymeme. What's the unstated premise? So next time you see a bumper sticker, come up with your unstated premise. I'm sure that you can quite find it. But most of our advertisements are also going to be an enthymeme. And so we can see how we can deduct from whatever is being said what that conclusion is, or we can come to our own understanding about what that conclusion is. And usually, and again, Aristotle suggests that when the audience has a part to play in their own shaping of their own knowledge of gathering a conclusion on their own, then it's much more likely that they'll be persuaded. And that's why it's an effective way to use the syllogism. Sure.
Can an enthymeme be a picture?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So all logic, remember, an enthymeme can be a picture. There's going to need to be two parts to it. So are you saying the enthymeme all on its own if there's just a single picture?
Yeah, just a single picture.
Probably not.
Okay.
Because I don't know how I'm going to draw to a conclusion on the basis of one picture. The picture itself is probably communicating something. So that's maybe a proof of its own, but it needs to be coupled with something else. There needs to be like two parts to this argument so that it can create exactly what you are trying to tell us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Does that make sense to anybody else? That just having the picture on its own would simply be maybe a persuasive tool or an image, or maybe it's being used as pathos, or maybe it's being used as, like a part of credibility, but like the credibility coupled with the statement is now going to make the enthymeme. The third type of reasoning that we'll look at here is called causal reasoning. And causal reasoning is reasoning that seeks to establish the relationship between cause and effect. Because this happened, then in turn, this will be the result. You see this all the time in court cases. You and I hung out last week. We had a great time. After I had left your house and we had a couple bottles of wine, I left, and walking out, I fell on some ice that was outside of your house, and I slipped and I broke my leg. Now I am suing you for my broken leg and my medical damages. Because that piece of ice was there, I broke my leg. And that's what I will try to prove in what? Court. But what is your attorney going to come in and bring? Ha-ha! But she was what?
Drunk.
And she was wearing
Heels.
And she wasn't wearing her
Glasses.
And thus, was the cause the ice, or was the cause the defendant? Does this make sense? So they're going to try to bring up numerous other reasons as to why or what caused the effect. That if the cause, did it actually do the effect? We are going to look at fallacies later, but what I just described to you on page 4 of your paper, if you turn to it, is something called a fallacy. A fallacy is an error in reasoning, and this is where our reasoning, something doesn't seem right, or an audience is trying to persuade. So page 4, like the back page, all the way in the back, it's like made up of these, yeah. There we go, perfect. That's what it looks like. So it looks like this. Thou shalt not commit logical fallacies. Here. Okay, good. So the logical fallacy, or in this case, the error in reasoning, is something called a false cause. So a false cause can exist within causal reasoning. So a false cause, as it says here on the paper, if it does, oh, there we go. Presuming that I could just read this for myself, a real or perceived relationship between things mean that one is the cause of the other. So there was this documentary back in the day, and it was called Super Size Me. You ever seen it?
Yeah.
The claim is that McDonald's, if you eat McDonald's, you get fat. If I eat McDonald's, will I get fat, everyone?
No.
No.
You eat it 3 times a day, every day for a month.
There we go. And so there is the claim. So, go ahead.
I don't want to speak in favor of McDonald's. I know it's bad for you, but apparently at a university, this professor said he wanted to prove that wrong, and what he told, I think it was a nutrition professor, he told his students, write me a diet, a McDonald's diet that'll fit my daily schedule. Did it for 2 weeks, and he said he lost, 2 pounds?
Good. Okay. Tell me about, though, the person, if you're looking to lose weight, can you lose weight on a McDonald's diet? Did you see the documentary? Yeah, you can lose weight on a McDonald's diet. Why can you lose weight?
Well, if you're not eating a supersized meal every time you go there.
What else about it? It doesn't have any what? It doesn't have a lot of what?
The drinks do. Doesn't have a lot of.
And I mean, now we're just getting into like the idea of food and what's food made out of, right? So like if you're not putting good foods into your body, if you're not putting anything but like empty foods into your body, then okay, first and foremost, you can't lose weight. Second of all, sure, if you make anybody fit within the 2,000 calorie a day diet plan that's best for them, so whatever it is, like if you come up with a diet for somebody and are like, all right, well, you can only have 1,400 calories a day, I'll give you 1,400 calories a day from McDonald's and a limited amount of fat, then what?
Make sure you have a lot of water.
It's simply science, people, okay? I could eat 6 cheeseburgers today and not gain a pound. Why?
Daily intake.
Because it just depends on my daily intake, and my daily output. It has nothing to do with the actual food. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay, good. This is the flaw in eating disorders. If I eat a cheeseburger, I will get fat. That's not true, and that's why it's an illogical statement, and that's why people with a pathology tend to have an illogical brain, right? If I eat a cheeseburger, I will not get fat. It's a false cause. Does that make sense to everybody? That's like a good example. Okay. Now, going back to you, Beyonce. If we're suggesting causal reasoning in your advertisement, if you do this, you will get this. Is that the case?
Nope.
The fact that she said feel the power gives me an idea that that's not causal reasoning. It's not suggesting that I am going to be powerful, but instead I can take on an essence and feel powerful. So a little bit different. But can you think of advertisements where they have told you, or any type of artifact where they have told you, if you do blank, you will have blank?
Red Bull, it gives you wings.
Yes, okay, good. It'll give me wings. Literally. Figuratively. AKA, it will give me.
That's why I took it off.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
It doesn't have it anymore.
They don't have that. It gives you wings anymore.
See? Couldn't say it. All right, well, good. They got on their floor. Fantastic. So causal reasoning we'll look at. So it seeks to establish the connection between cause and effect. And typically, what do you need between making the claim that this is the issue and this was the effect? Some type of evidence. Again, in advertising or in artifacts, there may not be the opportunity to provide you with 16 pounds of evidence. And thus, we look at does A equal B, and we come to our own conclusion on it. The last type of reasoning is something called analogical reasoning. So it's an analogy, right? You don't have to do this on your SAT anymore, so I don't know if anybody even knows what this analogy is. Pens are to pencils as paper is to blank. Do you remember these questions? Did you ever have to take questions like these in school?
No.
They do this in law school. I mean, if you ever want to take the LSAT, it's a huge section of analogies because they want to know that you can analogically reason. What does analogical reasoning mean? Well, let's look. Reasoning that compares two cases and suggests that what's true in one case must be true for the other. So in court cases, you will oftentimes hear them when they're making a verdict compare a situation or compare a court case from previously done. And it's like, well, this held true in this case, so it must hold true in this case as well. You will hear this come up, I'm quite sure, in the next time California wants to legalize marijuana. This is the claim that they will make. Because we don't have legal recreational marijuana in California, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Thus, if we would like to make it true, we're going to have to examine, or if we want to make it legal, a great way, other than just saying, hey, it's going to build a lot of economy. It's going to build a lot of revenue. People are going to not be as addicted, and it's going to lower taxes, and we're going to get California out of debt. So we should do it, right? So rather than giving you a bunch of reasons, people would probably analogically reason. And you're probably going to see this a lot when it comes up. People are going to say, well, hey, in the past election in 2012, Colorado voted to make recreational marijuana legal, as well as, medicinal, so you can use it at all times. Since this time, Colorado has had a huge boom in their economy. They have lowered the amount of crime in their community. They have raised small business owners. Schools are getting more funding, and people are committing less petty crime, all because of this rise of legalizing marijuana. Thus, we can suggest that what was good and true for Colorado will also be good and true for who? California. So they'll make a comparison between the two to show you that, well, if it worked in this case, it's probably going to work in this case as well. Does that make sense to y'all? So we use that type of analogy or analogical reasoning. What's good in one situation can also be true in another. So if they're comparing two things that are similar and suggesting that if it worked in one, or if it's true in one case, it can be true in the other. So these are our forms of reasoning. You are going to need to understand these for your exam. So are there any right now definitions that you're having a hard time with before we start to put them into practice? Anyone? No. All right, I'm going to bring this over here quickly so that we can talk about a couple of the fallacies. So we had talked before about these things called logical fallacies. And logical fallacies, all that they are errors in reasoning. But I picked these out in particular to speak about, in addition to the ones that are on your sheet, so that you can come and start to acknowledge them. So if any of you have a piece or an artifact that you are suggesting is ineffective, you may want to identify in their logos the type of reasoning that was used and how it was ineffective because of its logical fallacy. Does that make sense? So if you can pick out a logical fallacy, that would be a great way to identify or use that for your speech, or for your presentation. Let's first look at the slippery slope. What's a slippery slope? Well, basically from what it says there on the piece of paper, and I can tell you a little bit more about this, it means that taking one step or making one decision or making one rule or one law is going to lead to subsequent steps that can't be avoided. This type of logical fallacy is what individuals tried to use when we were saying that same-sex marriage should be legalized. But the idea is that if we legalize same-sex marriage, then what were like the extreme... Yeah, go ahead.
People are going to marry their pets.
People are going to marry their pets. They're going to marry their computers. You're going to marry mattresses and inanimate objects, and then the whole world's up in chaos, right? So by allowing one, will it allow the other? I'm going to say probably not. Absolutely. So this would be something like a slippery slope. There used to be these terrible drug commercials back in the day about the slippery slope. Just to go back to marijuana, they used to be so funny. It'd be like the anti-marijuana smoking campaigns. And it'd be like this kid smoking pot, and then like you'd see a picture of a little girl standing in front of a bus with a balloon, and it'd go back to the kid smoking weed, then it'd go back to the little girl, and then it'd go back to the kid smoking weed, and then a bus would drive by, and then the little girl wasn't there, and it's like, if you smoke weed, your sister will be abducted. And then it might, by the way, it's not saying that. It's an enthymeme. It's drawing you to this conclusion. You're like, what? Same thing used to happen that, and then there'd be like a grandma waiting by the phone with the cake, and then the kid with the weed, and the grandma by the phone eating cake, and then the kid, and then the grandma, and it'd be like, if you smoke weed, you hate your grandma. And you're like, what? That's my grandma? It's so confusing, right? So these were the it didn't take you on a logical step of things. Sure, like do people become forgetful if they become super into the marijuana? Yeah, absolutely. What takes priority in their life? The marijuana. So would they forget maybe about grandma one time or somebody? Sure. It doesn't mean you hate your grandma or that your little sister's going to get abducted, but like there's some logic in there somewhere, but they weren't presenting that quite effectively. That's a slippery slope. The black or white, or I like to call it the either or fallacy, is where they present only two options when more than one exists. This was George Bush's major fallacy in his argument for the war on terrorism. Right after 9/11, because people are fearful and scared, and we don't know about things like terrorism and have an attack in so long, and we've never had an attack this severe, and people are angry and they're scared and they're confused, and George Bush comes on the TV and he said, either you are for this war, or you are for terrorism. And you're like, you know what I really don't like right now? Terrorism, that's for damn sure. So I guess, man, I don't like war either, but God, it's only giving me two choices. Okay, yay, I'm for war, right? So it either gives you only the two choices exist. And when we only present people with the either or fallacy, either you do this or you're going to end up on the streets as a drug dealer, you're like, no. Either you go to college or nothing will ever happen to you for the rest of your life. That'll be good. Right? We see these advertisements or these arguments that people make oftentimes. So this black or white or either or. The bandwagoning idea assumes that because something is popular, it's correct. So it's why your parents never bought into your argument, because it was an illogical fallacy of everybody's doing it, but I have to go. It's the most important thing. Everybody's going to go. Not everybody's what? Going. My life will be over if I don't do this. You must let me. Will your life be over? No. So like everybody's doing it just because everybody's jumping off a bridge, Amanda. Are you going to do it? No. Bandwagoning. It's not always correct. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's the right choice. So in ways of speeches, all persons love freedom. All persons love equality. Watch those words. Those are essentializing. And secret option B, not everybody is doing it. So when we assume or we bandwagon, it demeans our audience. The appeal to authority. What's the appeal to authority that it says on your paper?
Read the appeal to authority. Using the opinion or position of an authority figure or institution of authority in place of an actual argument.
Mm-hmm. So when we take the authority's position, so again, you may see this flaw in your argument, that is the name of a company, i.e. is just putting PETA on an advertisement enough to move an audience towards a conclusion. In the absence of not enough evidence, will people sometimes put just a name brand or a logo to get by or to appeal? Yes. Yeah, I heard, I don't know if any of you watched Donald Trump yesterday on the Today Show. Matt Lauer did a town hall meeting with him, essentially, and he couldn't get enough of talking about how much people like him. Like about how popular he is and how much people like him. And so in my opinion, he was very much in this kind of appeal to authority. He didn't talk about anything that he was going to do, shocker, or any of his plans about how he's going to do anything, but instead he just wanted to talk about how many people know him and how many people have known about him and as a famous figure, and how that makes him very likable.
and I don't know if this rhetoric is, clearly this rhetoric is working, that if you just tell somebody that, like, I'm likable, I'm fantastic enough times that people just are buying into it. It's crazy town, right? If I continue to just tell you how fantastic I am, do you think that when my evaluations come out, you'll just be like, what's up?
Repetition.
Repetition, which is a sign of path. Yeah, because it is type of linguistic devices to make you feel something. Repetition, right? Yes, we can. Yes, we can change. Yes, we can. The last one is appealing to emotion. This is one of the easiest tactics of any type of advertisement. If you've ever been on campus and somebody has handed you a pamphlet about not eating meat or about not having an abortion, you know exactly how they appeal to emotion. Have you ever been on campus and gotten a flyer about not eating meat? What do these flyers look like? Are they like, don't eat meat?
Yeah.
What you open up and what are you seeing?
Slaughterhouse.
Like graphic images.
You're seeing a ton of graphic images. And what? What? Why are you laughing? Tell me. I'm so excited.
There was a tent in the corner of the library, and there was people. They're like, "Oh, can you do a survey? We'll give you $1." Yeah. Anyway,
End of the video.
it was actually in terms of trying to get you not to eat meat. It was one of those little. But Daniel here comes with a plate full of chicken, and the person just looks at him in disappointment. He didn't even tell him to take the.
To take the survey, like you weren't their audience.
Yeah.
You can't
They
have
don't
this
do
dollar.
that.
That's funny. So the next time, and if we've ever seen these anti-abortion pamphlets, oftentimes they will run it solely on photos of aborted fetuses, photos of a baby, the graphic images and photos that make you feel what? Sad and bad and disgusted. But it doesn't have any type of evidence or support to go along with it. So let's talk about the appeal to the emotion. Many people will talk about that Sarah McLachlan commercial, the In the Arms of the Angel. We talked about this before, that when that commercial starts, how many of you stick around and watch the whole thing? Not one of you. This is an incredibly ineffective use of pathos for persuasion because it makes us all feel so bad that it certainly doesn't get us to do anything or take action. Now, I'm not saying that it's appealing to emotion, because appeal to emotion would typically appeal to emotion to get us to do something, right? It's still an ineffective way of utilizing the logic. Does this make sense to y'all? So any questions about your 4 different types of reasoning or the types of fallacies? Because
So are we only focusing on these ones, or do we need to know all of these?
you don't need to know them for your exam. I want you to be able to simply identify them if they come up. So I went over these because these are the ones that we will most commonly see. But if your artifact that you're trying to maybe prove ineffective exemplifies one of the other or multitudes, feel free to pull from those and use them as examples as well. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. I'm going to pull this down, and let's start to go over some of these examples. I was like, wait, I need to pull down the thing. But then I forgot we don't have one in our class. And that's okay. Just a little behind. All right, team. Let me turn off these front lights so that we can see some of the examples. All right. If we were looking at this artifact, it says, for those of you who can't see it, in town, car accidents don't just happen to cars.
It says slow down.
Slow down.
Slow down. Thank you, everybody. Slow down. What type of reasoning is this?
Appeal to emotion.
Well, that's a fallacy. Does it show evidence to drive you to your conclusion?
No, but
Deductive reasoning?
Could you explain to me why it's deductive reasoning?
Because you're going from car accidents happen just to cars, but it really happens to people. And then going from a different point to theirs.
Slow down. All right. We can look at this. If the child wasn't there, would this be deductive reasoning?
no.
Think about that one more time. What? Because? Okay, great. Let's look at these two. Enthymeme, syllogism. One more time. Syllogism, 3 parts of an argument. In your town, car accidents don't just happen to cars. It clearly happens to
People.
children and people as well. Thus, you should slow down. If the picture isn't there, now it's an enthymeme. It has 2 parts to it. In town, car accidents don't just happen to cars. Slow down. We can deduct from that or come to our own conclusion that it happens
just
to
cars.
other things. So
Other
you get in
things,
accidents if I don't slow down, right? But in turn, it wants you to realize that you could, in fact, hit who? A child. So now we can see that this not only has logos, but it also has what? How? What are the resources of Pathos?
Emotional feeling.
It's using a
child.
child.
To guilt you.
To guilt you. Good. So now I feel guilty. I feel sad. I feel like, oh no, small child, right? So not only has pathos been used, but also deductive reasoning. Does that make sense to you all? What the 3 parts of the argument are? Saying, image, conclusion. Major premise, minor premise, conclusion. And pathos is within it as well. So those are 2 parts. Is it effective?
Yeah.
Yes. In town, car accidents don't just happen to cars. True, it does happen. Who does it happen to? And who could it happen to? Pretty much anyone. So by using a child, is it ineffective because I'm just playing on kids? No, I'm not like only using a sad child who's mangled to try to get you to do something. Thus, I would say it's an effective use. Let's look at another. This says, consider your man card reissued. Bushmaster, and Bushmaster is a gun company. What type of reasoning is this?
Ethos.
Okay, what type of reasoning?
I mean,
Because?
it has two parts, the gun and the consider your man card reach.
What's the unstated premise?
But when you get the gun, you're more of a man or something.
Okay, good. Is that what it says right there? Consider your man card reissued, saying you're more of a man. Fantastic. What other type of reasoning could we consider in this as well?
Did you use analogical?
Well, what's good in one case is going to be good in another.
Also,
Causal, tell me why.
because it's saying if you get the gun, then you're going to be more of a man.
There we go. So if we do A, then B will happen. Does that make sense to everybody? Fantastic. Isn't it an effective use of rhetoric?
No,
Because?
because I don't relate to that at all.
Okay, good, because you don't relate to it. Fantastic. But logically, why isn't it effective? I'm sure it's selling tons because masculinity is something so easy to play on.
Especially in the South.
Sure, and now we're essentializing, but sure. But what else? Is that true? Is that a true cause? Because we know what happens with men who get heavy machine guns. They oftentimes what? What have we seen in the news?
Shoot people.
Yeah, they shoot people. For what?
Crazy reasons.
For crazy ass reasons. Good. So thus, are you more of a man if you have that? No. Okay, so not only is it like probably a false cause, but in turn having something to be that kind of propagated is ineffective rhetoric. Good. All right, let's look at another one. These are always amazing. Let's continue to remind women about their subservient sexual positions in life. Let's continue to go forward here, though. Thanks, Burger King. What type of reasoning is you? I did? Oh man, short-term memory loss, huh? Okay, what's your type of reasoning, friends? It just tastes better. It'll blow your mind away.
Title, physical. BK Super 7.
What, huh?
Maybe analogical.
Okay, B, why would you say analogical? It's comparing what?
It's comparing the different.
It's comparing a cheeseburger to what? A sex act. Okay? Kids. Kids are eating that cheeseburger. Thanks, Burger King. Saying that's what good. It's good in one situation is what? Good in another. Does this make sense to you all? Is it effective? Some people like to use the words that like the food is so good it's so, I mean, I can see where they're going with the idea. Is the cheeseburger actually, I mean, that's up in the air to, like, people, if they want to make that type of comparison. Is it a false analogy to compare the two?
I just think they could have used a more acceptable.
Of course they could, but why? When sex sells so easily. It's just an easy way to persuade, maybe some baseless rhetoric. What we don't see, however, is any evidence that provides us that it is going to be a mind-blowingly good. Right? What do you see?
You just see the burger.
We just see the
Somebody
burger. We
about to
don't know
eat it.
anything about it. And you also see the
girl about to eat it.
right, the girl who is allegedly going to have said 7-incher sandwich. Again, I mean, I can go on and on for days about this kind of advertising, but neither here nor there. So if we wanted to look at it as analogy, we could look at it as an analogy. If you wanted to claim it being ineffective, I think you would be able to make a case for it being so. All right. I'm twice as likely not to graduate high school because you had me as a teen. Kids of teen moms are twice as likely not to graduate than kids whose moms are over age 22. What type of argument is this? Or what type of reasoning?
Causal or enemy.
Okay.
Causal, because if you do that, then it's not going to graduate or go to high school.
Okay, so if I have a baby under
22 or as a teen.
as a teen,
Then they won't graduate, or won't have as good of a chance at graduating if you have children at such a young age.
okay, good. So talk to me more about this enthymeme that you were talking. I'm twice as likely not to graduate high school because you had me as a teen. Kids of teen moms are twice as likely to not graduate than kids whose moms are over 22. Therefore, what's the unstated premise?
If you're a teen and you have a kid, then he's more likely not to graduate.
What do they want you to do?
Have kids until you're older.
Okay, good. So text blah, 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 blah for the real price of pregnancy. It's this advertisement in New York, right? So if you're not getting the deduction, if you're not getting the idea that you shouldn't be having a baby, and you're instead looking at the argument instead, then it may not be as effective of an enthymeme as we can suggest. We can look at it as causal reasoning if you wanted to, but it's the unstated isn't there. It's not telling you if you have blank, then do blank. So, I mean, we can read it in that way. What's the pathos?
Crying baby.
Crying baby. Is that crying baby crying because they didn't go to school? Because of their mom? No. What other emotions are being played upon within this advertisement without having to say it? I have guilt all day long. I think about Dylan at school all day long. I think, oh my gosh, should I be with her? Oh my gosh, is she crying right now? Oh my gosh, does she need me? Oh my gosh, is she getting angry? Oh my gosh, is she aggressive because she goes to date? All this shit. Does that just come from anywhere? No, it comes from places like what? Oh, good, advertising and family, you know. But also, this idea that, what? In this case, what are they saying? What are they playing on? Guilt, shame, etc. And how many of you were raised by a single mom, if you think about that in your head? And how many of you probably graduated high school? Or how many of you had a teen parent? Like, it is so much shaming also, oftentimes, of teen shaming in our schools and in our society that's problematic as well. Oh, man. I don't know what they want you to do. Also, like, is it an abortion line? I'm not kind of sure. Anyway. All right, team. So here's a perfume ad, eh? Be delicious. DKNY, the fragrance for women. So what type of reasoning is this?
Smell delicious.
What type of reasoning is this?
Sexual?
Is that a type of reasoning?
Oh shit, sorry.
That if what?
Causal, what's it called? Well,
If I,
use the perfume.
then
Yeah.
it will be delicious, right? Be delicious, DKNY. So the Be delicious fragrance for men, women, DKNY. We can look at that as some type of cause. If I use this perfume, I will then be delicious. Again, let's go back to the problem. Something to be consumed, something to be eaten, but I can go along with that. Women notice the placement of the apples. Neither here nor there. Now, hey, Meaty Mcmeat. When you ride with meat, you ride with Hitler. So back in the day, you can associate anything with Hitler during World War II to get you to do something. So when you ride with meat, you ride with Hitler. I just gave it away.
Yeah.
So it's deductive reasoning. It's an enthymeme. What's the unstated premise?
If you feel like
Well, when you ride with meat, you ride with Hitler. So we should what? Instead have, and by the way, that's pork. It's a can of pork,
Bacon.
right?
I like
If,
bacon.
when you should ride with Hitler, therefore,
I read with it.
don't eat meat or eat pork instead, or God, I would never want to support Hitler, so obviously I'm going to. So what type of fallacy could this be? If you eat meat, you ride with Hitler. Daniel, do you ride with Hitler? You eat chicken, you ride with Hitler? Not really. No, you don't. How many of you eat meat? How many of you love the Aryan way and want to see everybody? Okay, good. What type of fallacy is this?
Yeah, black, white.
Black and white, right? Either you blank or you're blank. It's like, no, I like meat, but I don't like Hitler. Oh, all right, finally, pork. No. Diet Dr. Pepper, testosterone. So 10 calories. It says testosterone, manliest low-cal soda. Manliest low-cal soda. So what type of reasoning is this?
It is. I'm guessing causal. No,
Well, I mean, just describe to me why.
because like I'm assuming that men are associated with liking Dr. Pepper, but I'm gonna use a bigger general picture. You know how, media portrays attractive women as skinny, therefore they only drink diet drinks.
Sure.
A man who wants to drink something that's not as, fattening, who also wants to drink diet but doesn't want to be called a sissy. Well, this one, because I guess it's being portrayed as still slightly manly to drink.
Yeah, sure. Good. Anybody want to take a stab at an induction at all?
It gives a statistic.
Sure. It has 10 bold calories. It's the manliest drink. It's the manliest low cal soda. It's filled with what? Not just testosterone, but testosterone. Therefore, we can conclude that this Dr. Pepper is good for who? Men, yeah. Right? So we could do something to that extent if you wanted to. Okay, well, that's funny. I don't even know what I was doing that one for. All right. So these examples are just some. You can do this with pretty much any advertisement that you come up upon, and any advertisement that you see, and practice on your own if you'd like to. But remember that if you're talking about logos, your job will be to describe which type of reasoning was used, give a definition of that, and explain it. If it was ineffective, the advertisement, remember, if you're using logos, to point out one of the fallacies that is present that makes that argument ineffective. So those of you that are going on Thursday, you have the 29th, please make sure that you bring in with you your evaluation sheet. You'll come in that day, try to come in about 10 minutes early to get your artifact set up. Again, we may not have use of the overhead projector, so try to bring with you a computer image instead. So take a photo of yours and pull it up or find it online. And then you'll come in, sign up in the order that you want to go, put your evaluation sheet on the desk in numerical order, pull up your photo, and then sit down and get ready to go. Remember, you don't have to have a outline for this speech, like I said before, and you're always free to email me a sample of your speech for evaluation until 5 o'clock the day before that you get it. Any other questions? Do you have a question? Oh, okay. All right, everyone. Have a great day.